Hello everyone, welcome to another video. I hope that you are doing well. In this video I would like to go over how I made this forest / jungle style hardscape and give you some tips and tricks so you can create something like this as well. I've always been fascinated by this style of aquascaping, and recently I was really inspired by an aquascape from Liquid Nature in Vienna. I spent about 2 weeks making this hardscape. Every evening I would work on it for an hour or so, making small improvements, until I was happy with the end result. And if you are considering of making something like this yourself, I really encourage you to take your time as well and do it slowly. So what do we need to make something like this? Obviously we need some hardscape, so we need rocks and wood. And you can use any type of hardscape you like, but when it comes to the wood, I suggest to look for pieces of wood that are more or less straight. And try to buy different sizes as well, so you have some really thick pieces of wood and some really thin pieces. The type of wood that I used here is called trunk tree from Rio. Oh, and I also suggest that you stick with one type of wood and one type of rock. Mixing up too many different hardscape materials is going to make it look more unnatural. We also need some glue. I really like to use the liquid type super glue in combination with paper towels, and I'll explain later exactly how this works. Then we need substrate. Now I used aquasoil, even though I probably won't be planting a lot of plants in the substrate. I'm actually planning to use mostly moss and epiphytes. But I still had some available and it's easy to work with. You can also just use gravel or crushed lava rock, but I do suggest you use something that's quite large, because you will very likely end up with a thick layer of substrate in the back and you don't want anything compacting over time. I definitely do not recommend that you go with sand. We do need a little bit of decorative sand though, that is if you want to make a sand path in your layout. And lastly, you might also need some tools like a wood saw, a hammer and some pliers or cutters. Alright, so how do we start building our jungle? Well, for me the goal with this style of aquascaping is to 1. Create something that looks like a forest or a jungle, so we need to find hardscape that can resemble a lot of trees. And 2. Create a lot of depth, so the size of our hardscape is very important here. And 3. Create the illusion that the tank is much bigger than it actually is. And that can also be done with the hardscape, but I think the choice of plants is even more important here. There will be a whole separate video about the planting process. So let's see how we can achieve those goals. I started by placing the biggest rocks and woods on the left and right side to create an entry into the forest. It's especially important that the wood that you use in front is thicker than the wood that you will use in the middle or in the back. By having big pieces in front and small pieces in the back, we can really start to create that sense of depth. The beginning here is the most difficult, because the front part is the most visible and has to look really good. Everything that comes after will be further away from the eye, and mistakes can more easily be covered by plants. I struggled a lot with the left side because I could not find a piece of wood that was very suitable. So I used a wood saw to remove all of the roots from an existing piece of wood until I was just left with a stump. Then later on I reattached some of those roots again in a different way to make it more suitable. So sometimes the materials that you have just don't really work straight out of the box, and you have to get a little bit more creative to make it work. Once you are done with the front part, we can start adding in some substrate. We do this so our next pieces of rocks and wood are a little bit more elevated. To maximize the sense of depth, we need to start building some height. If our hardscape and our substrate will be just flat, the final result will look very small and narrow. The aquarium that I used is only 30 cm front to back. By raising the substrate, we can basically extend the bottom and extend the path and make the aquarium look longer, if that makes sense. Alright, so the front part is done and we have added some substrate. Now we can continue building our hardscape. And at this point I really like to start shaping the path. So we have created our entry into the forest, and now we need to create a path that will lead deep into the forest. For this scape in particular, creating the path took quite some time. Just like the wood, we need to start with bigger rocks in front and end with smaller rocks. And to really increase that sense of depth, we also want to make the path start quite wide and end very narrow. There are two things you want to avoid when making the path. You want to avoid having the path completely in the center of the tank. This will create symmetry, and there's not much symmetry in nature, so we want to avoid it in our tank as well. And two, you also don't want the path to be one straight line towards the back. Try to create a nice curve or a little zigzag. Something that I like to do as well is make the end of the path disappear. So the path can take a curve and disappear behind a tree or a rock. This will add more interest to the layout. When the outline of the path has been made, we can continue making more trees. And here it just comes down to trial and error, and effectively using the size of the trees to establish that sense of depth. And this is also when I start to use super glue. With this type of hardscape, you really want the whole structure to be solid. You don't want your trees to fall over when you touch them. My favorite method is with the liquid type superglue that's made of cyanoacrylate. This type of superglue is completely safe to use in an aquarium. And we also need to use some paper towels. So if there's anything I like to glue together, I'll just take a tiny piece of paper towel, wrap it into a small bowl, and wedge it in between the two parts that I want to connect. Small tweezers are perfect for this as well. Then I'll add a few drops of superglue on that piece of paper towel, basically soaking it with glue. Then hold it for a few seconds if you need to, and in less than 30 seconds the paper towel will become rock solid, forming a strong bond between the two pieces. You might see some smoke coming from the paper towel, which is not very pleasant for your nose or your eyes, so I suggest you do this outside. For this method to work, it is important that the hardscape materials that you are trying to glue together are completely dry. If it's wet, it won't stick properly. And in case you don't have paper towels, you can also use toilet paper, cigarette filters or cotton pads. You can make as many trees as you like, just make sure that you have uneven numbers, again to avoid symmetry. So we have our path and we have our trees. What's next? Well, if you're happy with the overall composition of the hardscape, it's time to work on the details. So I like to add a lot of smaller branches, especially in front, and make it look like they are part of the tree and they have always been there. The small branches are also glued using the same technique, or sometimes with just super glue and without the paper towel. Adding the details also means we can add our decorative sand to finally make our path. And this is what really makes the whole hardscape come together in my opinion. With the sand in, I also like to add some small bits of rock to make the sand path blend in more with the rest of the hardscape. And something I actually did for the first time here is I glued the entire sand path. You know, a sand path looks nice, especially in the beginning, but before you know it, it starts looking messy. Maybe there will be some soil particles on the sand or some plants decided to grow there. So to keep it looking nice requires a lot of work. But now that I've covered everything with superglue, it's literally all solid and rock hard. And this should make maintenance very easy. For me, that's the hardscape complete. But I have a few more tips and tricks for you. First up, the substrate. Because I've added in a lot of soil, it's quite high in the back and very low in the front. There's always a chance that the soil will start rolling forward. To prevent this, I like to add some substrate supports. I like to cut a few sheets of plastic from an old in vitro cup and wedge these in the substrate. This way the soil will stay in place and will not come rolling down and destroy our layout. If you have any gaps in between your hardscape where the soil might spill out, you can also fill these gaps with filter floss. If you used a lot of paper towels and superglue, then you might have all these white spots in your hardscape. You can cover these spots with either sand or other substrate material and more superglue. Another tip, there's no harm in trying to copy someone else's scape. I will be honest with you and say that during the early stages of this hardscape, I had a picture of the scape that inspired me next to me the whole time. Even if you tried your best, it's never going to look exactly the same, because people will use different type of hardscape and every piece of hardscape is unique. The last thing I'll say is really take your time with it. The more time you spend on the hardscape, the better it will become. If you feel like it's not working, just take a step back and try again the next day. I had days where I just didn't make any progress and nothing seemed to fit. And then there were days where everything seemed to be flowing. That's it for part 1 of this jungle forest style tutorial. Stay tuned for part 2 where we will talk all about the planting process and how we're going to make this forest come to life. Thanks for watching, do me a favor and smash that like button, and I'll see you next time.